Welcome back to the Nightfall Archive. I'm glad you're here with me tonight. To those of you who've been following this channel for a while, thank you for sticking around. Your support means the world to me, and I don't take a single one of you for granted. And to those of you who are just discovering us, welcome to the family. If you enjoy what you hear tonight, consider hitting that subscribe button. I promise you, there's plenty more where this came from. Before we dive in, I have a small request. I would love to know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Drop a comment below with your country and the hour on your clock. It always amazes me to see how far these stories travel, and it truly warms my heart knowing that people from all corners of the world are gathered here together, sharing in these experiences. So please, let me know. I read every single comment. Now, tonight's story takes us deep into the hills of southwestern Virginia, into a place where the ridges run deep and the hollows keep their secrets. This account was sent to me by a man named Nathan. What happened to him and his girlfriend in those mountains is something that has stayed with me since the first time I read it. So settle in, take a breath, and let me take you back to those ancient hills where some things are better left undisturbed. My mother died on a Tuesday in March. It was sudden, the way these things sometimes are. An aneurysm, the doctor said. She was in the kitchen making coffee, and then she was on the floor, and then she was gone. No warning. No chance to say goodbye. Just here one moment and gone the next. Like a candle blown out by a wind you never saw coming. I got the call at work. I remember exactly where I was standing, exactly what I was doing, exactly how the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I listened to the voice on the other end of the line tell me that my mother was dead. I remember how the world seemed to tilt slightly, how everything suddenly felt unreal, like I was watching my life happen to someone else. My name is Nathan, and at the time of my mother's death, I was 32 years old. And living in Richmond with my girlfriend Emma. We'd been together for 3 years, had talked about marriage, had built a life together that felt stable and good. I worked as an architect at a mid-sized firm. Emma was a nurse at the university hospital. We had an apartment with a view of the river, friends we saw on weekends, routines that felt comfortable. It was a good life. But it was a life that felt very far away from where I'd come from. I grew up in Appalachia, in a small community in southwestern Virginia called Den's Gap. It wasn't really a town, just a scattering of houses and trailers spread across a narrow valley between two ridges. The nearest real town was about 40 minutes away. The nearest city was over 2 hours. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, where people still grew their own vegetables and hunted their own meat, where the old ways persisted long after the rest of the world had moved on. I left when I was 18, the day after high school graduation, went to college in Blacksburg, then got a job in Richmond and never looked back. My mother understood. She'd always told me I was meant for bigger things, that I shouldn't let the mountains hold me back like they'd held back so many others. But she never left, even after my father passed when I was 15, even after the coal mine closed and half the community moved away, even after her health started to decline, and I begged her to come live with us in the city. She said the mountains were in her blood, said she couldn't leave them any more than she could leave her own skin, and now she was gone, and I had to go back. Emma insisted on coming with me. I tried to talk her out of it, told her it would be boring and sad, and she didn't need to waste her time. But she just looked at me with those steady brown eyes and said, "Nathan, your mother just died. You're not going alone." That was Emma, stubborn in the best possible way, always there when you needed her, whether you wanted her to be or not. We drove up on a Thursday, 2 days after I got the call. The funeral was scheduled for Saturday, and there was a lot to do before then. My mother had lived in the same house for over 40 years, the house where I'd grown up, and someone needed to go through her things, decide what to keep, what to donate, what to throw away, start the process of closing out a life. The drive took about 4 hours, the last hour winding up narrow mountain roads that hadn't changed since I was a kid. The further we got from the highway, the more the years seemed to fall away. I recognized landmarks I hadn't thought about in decades. The old general store that had closed when I was in middle school. The rusted-out skeleton of a pickup truck that had been sitting in the same field for as long as I could remember. The leaning wooden sign that marked the turnoff to Denton's Gap. The house sat at the end of a dirt road, tucked into a fold in the hillside, where 2 ridges came together. It was a modest place, just a 1-story structure with a wrap-around porch, built by my grandfather in the 1950s. The white paint was peeling, and the roof could use some work, but it was solid. Built to last. I parked in front and sat there for a moment, just looking at it. Emma reached over and took my hand. "You okay?" she asked. I wasn't sure how to answer that. I hadn't been back here in almost 3 years, hadn't seen my mother in over 18 months, and now I was sitting in front of the house where I'd grown up, and she wasn't inside waiting for me, and she never would be again. "Yeah," I said. "Let's go in." The inside of the house was exactly as I remembered it. The furniture my parents had bought when they got married. The pictures on the walls, chronicling decades of family history. The smell of wood smoke and lavender that I associated so strongly with my mother that it made my chest ache. We spent the rest of the day settling in and making a list of everything that needed to be done. The funeral home had taken care of most of the arrangements, but there were still details to handle, people to notify, food to organize for the reception afterward. That night, Emma made dinner from the supplies we'd brought, and we ate at the old kitchen table where I'd eaten thousands of meals as a kid. The house was quiet around us, the only sounds the creaking of the old walls and the wind moving through the trees outside. "It's peaceful here," Emma said. "I can see why your mom loved it." I nodded, but I wasn't really listening. My eyes had drifted to the window, to the darkness outside, to the mountains that rose up all around us like the walls of a prison. I'd forgotten how dark it got out here, how absolute the blackness was once the sun went down. In the city, there was always light somewhere, always the glow of street lamps or buildings or passing cars. But here, there was nothing, just the dark pressing in from all sides. And somewhere out there, deep in that darkness, I could have sworn I heard something moving. I woke up in the middle of the night, disoriented and confused. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. The room was wrong, the shadows unfamiliar. Then it came back to me. My mother's house, the funeral. Emma sleeping beside me in the bed that had once been mine. I lay there, trying to figure out what had woken me. The house was silent, the only sound Emma's soft breathing. Outside, the wind had died down, and the night was still. Then I heard it, a scratching sound coming from somewhere in the house. I sat up slowly, trying not to wake Emma. The sound was faint but persistent, a rhythmic scraping that seemed to be coming from the front of the house, from the porch. I got out of bed and walked quietly down the hall toward the living room. The scratching continued, getting louder as I approached. It sounded like something dragging against wood, like fingernails on a door. I reached the front door and stopped. The scratching was coming from the other side, low down, near the bottom of the door. My heart was pounding, and I suddenly felt very aware of how alone we were out here. No neighbors within shouting distance, no police who could arrive in less than half an hour. I grabbed the poker from the fireplace and approached the door. The scratching stopped. I waited, barely breathing. Silence. Then slowly, I unlocked the door and pulled it open. Nothing. The porch was empty. The yard beyond was swallowed by darkness. I stood there for a long moment, straining my eyes against the black, but I couldn't see anything moving. I was about to close the door when I looked down and saw the marks. There were scratches on the bottom of the door, deep gouges in the wood, running in parallel lines like something had been clawing at it. They looked fresh, the exposed wood pale against the weathered paint. I crouched down and ran my fingers over them. The gouges were deep, deeper than any animal I could think of should have been able to make. And they weren't random. They formed a pattern, a shape that almost looked like something, but I couldn't quite make it out in the darkness. A hand touched my shoulder and I nearly screamed. "Nathan?" Emma's voice, thick with sleep. "What are you doing?" I stood up quickly, blocking her view of the door. "Nothing. I thought I heard something, probably just an animal." She looked at me, then at the poker in my hand, then at the open door behind me. "An animal," she repeated. "Yeah, a raccoon or something. Go back to bed. I'll be there in a minute." She hesitated, but eventually nodded and went back down the hall. I waited until I heard the bedroom door close, then looked back at the scratches on the door. They weren't made by any raccoon. I knew that, but I didn't know what had made them, and I didn't want to think about it. I closed the door, locked it, and went back to bed. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I examined the scratches in daylight. They were worse than I'd thought. Deep gouges that had torn through the paint and into the wood beneath, leaving pale scars against the dark surface of the door. And the pattern was clearer now, though I still couldn't quite make sense of it. It almost looked like letters, but not from any alphabet I recognized. Emma found me staring at them when she came out with coffee. "What is that?" she asked, her voice sharp. "I don't know. I found them last night when I heard the scratching." She crouched down to look closer, her nurse's eye analyzing the marks. "These are deep. Whatever made them had to be strong." "I know." "And you said you heard scratching? Like something was making these while you were inside?" "Yeah." She stood up, her expression troubled. "Nathan, this doesn't look like an animal. The marks are too deliberate, too organized." I didn't say anything. I'd been thinking the same thing, but I didn't want to admit it. "Maybe we should call someone," Emma said. "The police. Or, I don't know, someone." "And tell them what? That something scratched our door in the middle of the night? They'll think we're crazy." "Then what do we do?" I looked out at the mountains rising around us, their slopes covered in dense forest that seemed to go on forever. "I don't know," I admitted. "But we're only here for a few more days. The funeral is tomorrow. After that, we can leave and never come back." Emma didn't look satisfied with that answer, but she didn't push. We had too much to do to spend the day worrying about scratches on a door. The morning was filled with practical matters. Phone calls to relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Trips to the funeral home to finalize details. A visit to the church where the service would be held. By afternoon, I was exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. Around 4 o'clock, I decided to take a walk. I needed to clear my head, and despite my unease about the scratches, the mountains were still beautiful in the autumn light. The leaves were turning, splashing the hillsides with color, and the air was crisp and clean. I followed an old path that led from the back of the house up into the woods. It was a trail I'd walked hundreds of times as a kid, though it was more overgrown now than I remembered. The forest had started to reclaim it, branches reaching across the path, underbrush creeping in from the sides. I walked for about 20 minutes, climbing steadily uphill until I reached a spot I remembered well, a rocky outcropping that jutted out from the hillside, offering a view of the valley below. I used to come here as a teenager when I needed to be alone, to sit and think and watch the world from a safe distance. I sat down on the rocks and looked out at the view. I could see my mother's house from here, small and distant, a white speck against the green and brown of the hillside. Beyond it, the valley stretched out toward the horizon, ridge after ridge, fading into blue haze. It was peaceful. For a moment, I felt some of the tension drain out of my shoulders. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, expecting to see Emma, or maybe a hiker from the area, but there was no one there, just the trees, their branches swaying slightly in the breeze. "Hello?" I called out. No response. The forest was silent. I stood up, scanning the tree line. The footsteps had been clear, distinct, the sound of someone walking through dead leaves, but I couldn't see anyone. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. About 50 yards away, partially hidden behind a large oak tree, someone was standing there, watching me. I couldn't make out details, just a dark shape, vaguely human in outline. It was standing perfectly still, not moving, not making any sound, just watching. "Hey!" I shouted. "Who's there?" The figure didn't respond. Didn't move. Just stood there, half hidden by the tree, watching. I took a step toward it, and it shifted. Not like a person stepping back. More like it slid. Moved sideways without seeming to take a step, gliding behind the tree until it was completely hidden. I waited. 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing moved. Finally, I walked over to the tree, my heart pounding. I don't know what I expected to find, but when I rounded the trunk, there was nothing there. Just empty forest, stretching away into the shadows. Except there was something. On the ground, pressed into the soft earth, was a footprint. A bare footprint, human in shape, but wrong somehow. Too long, too narrow, the toes spread wide in a way that didn't look right. The same kind of print I'd seen once before, in a story I'd been told as a child. I ran back to the house. When I burst through the door, Emma was in the kitchen, arranging flowers that had been delivered for the funeral. "Nathan, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I bent over, hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath. My mind was racing, memories flooding back that I'd tried to bury for years. "I need to tell you something," I said. "Something about this place, about why I really left." Emma set down the flowers and came over to me, her expression shifting from concern to worry. "Okay," she said slowly. "Let's sit down." We moved to the living room, settling onto the old couch. I didn't know where to start. How do you explain something you've spent half your life trying to forget? "When I was a kid," I began. There were stories about these mountains. Every community in Appalachia has them. Tales about things that live in the woods, things that aren't quite human. My grandmother used to tell me about them. She called them the hollow folk. Emma listened, her face neutral, not interrupting. The stories said they'd been here forever, before the settlers, before the native tribes, before anyone. They lived in the deep places, the caves and the abandoned mines and the hollows where the sun never quite reaches. Most of the time, they kept to themselves, but sometimes they came out, and when they did, bad things happened. What kind of bad things? I swallowed. People disappeared. Animals were found dead, mutilated in ways that didn't make sense. And there were visitations. The hollow folk would come to houses at night, scratch at the doors, look in the windows. They never came inside, not unless you invited them. But they watched. They waited. "Nathan," Emma said gently, "these sound like folk tales, stories people told to explain things they didn't understand." That's what I thought too. For most of my life, that's what I believed. But then something happened. something that made me leave and never come back. I paused, the memories pressing in on me, memories I'd kept locked away for 15 years. I was 17. It was the winter before my dad died. We'd had a bad ice storm, and the power was out for 3 days. My mom was in town, staying with my aunt until the roads cleared. It was just me and my dad in the house. I closed my eyes, seeing it all again, clear as the day it happened. The second night, I heard scratching at the door, just like last night. I got up to check, and my dad told me to stop. He grabbed my arm and pulled me back from the door. His face was... I'd never seen him look like that, terrified. He told me to be quiet, to not make a sound, to not look at the windows. Emma's hand found mine, squeezing gently. We sat there in the dark for hours. The scratching continued, moving around the house, door to door, window to window. And then I heard something else, a voice. It sounded like my mother, calling my name, asking to be let in. But your mother was in town. Exactly. My dad knew that. He put his hand over my mouth and held me there while that thing outside called for me in my mother's voice. It knew my name. It knew her voice. It was perfect. I opened my eyes, looking at Emma. The next morning, we found scratches on every door and window, the same kind of marks that are on the front door right now. My dad never talked about it. He died 6 months later, heart attack, and he took whatever he knew with him. And that's why you left? That's why I left. I couldn't stay in this place, knowing what was out there, knowing that someday it might come back. Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "And you think it has? Come back, I mean. I saw something in the woods today, something watching me, and the footprints it left behind, they matched what my grandmother described. Long and narrow, with spread toes. Not human, but close enough to be wrong." Emma took a deep breath. "Okay, let's say I believe you. What do we do?" "I don't know. My grandmother used to say there were ways to protect yourself. Salt on the windowsills, iron nails above the doors, never going outside after dark. But I don't know if any of that actually works." "Then we try all of it," Emma said, her voice firm. "We do whatever it takes to get through the next 2 days, and then we leave, together." I looked at her, at this woman who had just listened to me tell her that there were monsters in the woods, and had responded not with disbelief or mockery, but with practical determination. "I love you," I said. "I know," she replied. "Now let's find some salt." We spent the rest of the afternoon preparing. We poured salt along every windowsill and doorway. We found some old iron nails in the barn and hammered them above the door frames. We closed all the curtains and made sure every entrance to the house was locked and blocked. By the time night fell, the house felt like a fortress. Absurd, maybe, but also strangely comforting. We made dinner and ate by candlelight, not wanting to turn on the lights and make ourselves visible from outside. We talked about normal things, things that had nothing to do with the mountains, or the hollow folk, or the scratching on the door. Emma told me about a difficult patient she'd had the week before. I told her about a project at work that was driving me crazy. For a little while, it felt almost normal. The night passed without incident. No scratching, no footsteps, no voices calling from the darkness. When I woke up the next morning, the sun was streaming through the curtains and birds were singing outside, and I almost convinced myself that I'd overreacted. The funeral was at 11. We dressed in our black clothes and drove to the church, a small wooden building about 20 minutes away. The pews were filled with people I hadn't seen in years, old neighbors and distant relatives and friends of my mother who remembered me as a kid. The service was simple and heartfelt. People shared memories of my mother, stories I'd never heard, glimpses of a life she'd lived after I left. It hit me harder than I expected, the realization of how much I'd missed, how much time I'd wasted staying away. We buried her in the cemetery behind the church, next to my father. I threw a handful of dirt onto the coffin and said goodbye, and then it was over. My mother was in the ground, and I was still standing, and somehow the world kept turning. The reception was held at the church hall. People brought food, as they do in these communities, and there was more of it than we could ever eat. I shook hands and accepted condolences and made small talk with people whose names I barely remembered. At some point, an old woman approached me. She was tiny and wizened, her face a map of wrinkles, her eyes sharp and bright. It took me a moment to place her. "Mrs. Bellamy," I said. "It's been a long time." Ruth Bellamy had been my grandmother's closest friend. She'd been ancient when I was a kid, and somehow she was still here, still going, seemingly unchanged by the passage of time. "Nathan," she said, her voice thin but steady. "I was hoping to speak with you." She led me to a quiet corner of the hall, away from the other mourners. Her grip on my arm was surprisingly strong. "Your mother came to see me a few weeks ago," she said. "Before she passed, she was worried." "Worried about what?" Mrs. Bellamy's eyes met mine. "The same thing your grandmother was worried about all those years ago. The same thing that drove your father to an early grave." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "They're waking up, Nathan. The old ones. The hollow folk. They've been sleeping for a long time, but something stirred them. Your mother felt it. She said they'd been coming around the house at night, watching, waiting. She was afraid. Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she call? Would you have believed her? Would you have come?" I didn't have an answer for that. She thought if she just ignored them, they'd go away. Mrs. Bellamy continued. "That's what most people do. Pretend they don't exist and hope for the best. But it doesn't work like that. Once they've marked you, they don't give up. They're patient. They can wait for years, for decades. But eventually, they come for what's theirs. What do they want?" Mrs. Bellamy's face was grim. "No one knows for certain, but the old stories say they take people, bring them back to the hollow places, down into the dark, and those people are never seen again." I felt sick. "My mother, do you think they—" "No," she said firmly. "Your mother died of natural causes, but that doesn't mean they weren't circling, waiting for their chance." She paused. "And now you're here. Back in the house they've been watching. They know you're here, Nathan, and they remember." "Remember what?" "That night, 15 years ago. The night they came for you and your father. You escaped them. They don't forget that. They don't forgive." I stood there, frozen, as the weight of her words settled over me. "What do I do?" I asked. Mrs. Bellamy pressed something into my hand. It was a small pouch, made of old leather, tied closed with a strip of cord. "Keep this with you. It's mountain ash and rowan berries, blessed by the old words. It won't stop them, but it might slow them down." She gripped my arm again. "Get out of here, Nathan. Tonight. Don't stay another night in that house. Take your woman and go, and don't ever come back." She turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of mourners. I stood there, clutching the pouch, my heart pounding. We needed to leave. Now. We couldn't leave immediately. There were obligations, expectations, things that needed to be done. By the time we extracted ourselves from the reception and drove back to the house, it was already late afternoon. The sun was sinking toward the ridgeline, and I could feel the daylight slipping away. "We need to pack," I told Emma. "We're leaving tonight." "Tonight?" "Nathan, it'll be dark soon. Those mountain roads are dangerous at night. I don't care. We can't stay here. Not after what Mrs. Bellamy told me. I explained what she'd said, the words tumbling out in a rush. Emma listened, her face growing more serious with each sentence. Okay, she said when I finished. We pack fast. Essentials only. We can come back for the rest later, or just leave it. I don't care about stuff. We hurried inside and started throwing things into bags. Clothes, toiletries, the few valuables we'd brought. I grabbed the pouch Mrs. Bellamy had given me and shoved it in my pocket. We were almost done when I noticed the light. It was coming from outside, from the tree line at the edge of the property. A faint glow, flickering like candlelight, visible through the gaps in the curtains. Emma, I said quietly, come here. She came to the window and looked out. The light was still there, a single point of illumination in the gathering darkness. What is that? She whispered. I don't know. As we watched, the light began to move. Slowly, deliberately, it drifted along the edge of the forest, and then another light appeared, and another, and another. Within minutes, there were dozens of them, forming a rough semicircle around the house. Oh God, Emma breathed. The lights stopped moving. They just hung there, at the edge of the trees, surrounding us on three sides. The only gap was the dirt road that led out to the main route. They're blocking us in, I said. They knew we were going to try to leave. So what do we do? Just sit here? I looked at the lights, at the way they seemed to pulse slightly, like heartbeats. Then I looked at the dirt road, the only path out. We make a run for it, I said. Get to the car, drive as fast as we can, and don't stop until we hit the highway. And if they try to stop us, then we don't let them. We grabbed our bags and headed for the door. My hand was on the knob when I heard it. A voice, coming from outside, from the darkness. Nathan. It was my mother's voice. I froze, my blood turning to ice. Nathan, honey, why are you leaving? Don't you want to stay with me? Emma grabbed my arm. That's not her. You know that's not her. I know, I said, but my voice was shaking. Nathan, please. I've been so lonely. Won't you come out and talk to me? Just for a minute. The voice was perfect. Every inflection, every subtle tone. It sounded exactly like my mother, the way she'd sounded when I was a child and she'd called me in for dinner. We have to go, Emma said. Now. I nodded. I couldn't speak. My mother was dead, buried in the ground just hours ago. Whatever was out there, it wasn't her. It couldn't be her. But God, it sounded just like her. I yanked open the door and we ran. The night had fallen completely. The lights at the edge of the trees had multiplied, forming a ring around the property. They weren't flames, I realize now. They were eyes, dozens of pale, luminous eyes, watching us from the darkness. We sprinted toward the car, our bags bouncing against our backs. The eyes tracked our movement, but nothing emerged from the trees. Not yet. I yanked open the car door and threw myself behind the wheel. Emma was already in the passenger seat, slamming her door shut. I jammed the key in the ignition and turned it. Nothing happened. No, 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 I muttered, turning the key again. The engine made a clicking sound, but didn't catch. Come on! What's wrong? I don't know. It won't start. I tried again, and again. Each time, the same dead click. The eyes at the edge of the trees began to move. They were coming closer, drifting out of the forest in a slow, inexorable tide. Nathan, Emma said, her voice rising with panic. I looked up through the windshield and saw them clearly for the first time. They were tall, taller than any human, their bodies thin and angular. Their skin was pale, almost white, stretched tight over bones that seemed too long, too sharp. Their faces were wrong, human in the broadest sense, but distorted. The features too far apart, the mouths too wide, the eyes set deep in hollows that seemed to swallow the light, and they were all looking at us. "Back inside," I said. "Now." We scrambled out of the car and ran for the house. The figures didn't pursue, not quickly. They moved with that same slow deliberation, that patient confidence of predators who knew their prey had nowhere to go. We burst through the door and slammed it behind us. I threw the deadbolt and backed away, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The scratching started immediately, not just at the door this time. It came from everywhere. Every door, every window, the walls, the roof. A cacophony of clawing and scraping that seemed to fill the entire house. And through it all, the voices. "Nathan, honey, let me in. It's cold out here." My mother's voice coming from the front door. "Nathan, please. I need to talk to you. Just open the door." My father's voice from the window in the living room. "Nathan, buddy, what's going on? Let us in. We just want to help." A voice I didn't recognize at first. Then I did. It was my own voice, coming from somewhere behind the house. My voice as a child, high and scared. "Make it stop," Emma whispered. She had her hands over her ears, tears streaming down her face. "Make it stop, please." I pulled her close, wrapping my arms around her, trying to block out the sounds, but they were everywhere, inescapable, burrowing into my brain. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. The scratching, the voices, all of it cut off like someone had flipped a switch. Silence. I held my breath, waiting. Emma trembled against me. A minute passed, then another, and then a new voice spoke. It came from right outside the front door, close enough that whoever was speaking could have touched it. "Nathan." It was my grandmother's voice, the grandmother who had told me stories about the hollow folk when I was a child, the grandmother who had died when I was 12. "Nathan, sweetheart, open the door. I want to show you something." I closed my eyes. "There's nothing to be afraid of. I know you've heard scary stories, but they're not true. We just want to meet you. We want you to join us." "Don't listen," Emma said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's not her. It's not any of them." "I know," I said. "Then why is the door opening?" I looked down. My hand was on the deadbolt. I didn't remember putting it there. And as I watched, my fingers began to turn it slowly, as if moving of their own accord. "No," I said, trying to pull my hand back, but I couldn't. It was like my arm belonged to someone else. "No. Stop. Stop." Emma grabbed my arm and pulled with all her strength. For a moment, the deadbolt hovered between locked and unlocked. Then, with a supreme effort, I wrenched my hand away. The voices outside erupted in fury. Not words anymore, just sounds, shrieks and howls that seemed to shake the walls. The scratching resumed, more violent than before, and I could hear the wood of the door splintering under the assault. They were coming in. "The back door!" I shouted. "We have to get out." We ran through the house, toward the kitchen. The sounds followed us, that horrible chorus of scratching and screaming. I grabbed a heavy iron skillet from the counter, the only weapon I could find. The back door was still intact, but I could see shadows moving outside the window. They were surrounding the house, cutting off every escape route. "The root cellar," Emma said suddenly. "Is there a root cellar?" I remembered. There was an old cellar beneath the kitchen, accessed through a hatch in the floor. My father had used it for storage, and, more importantly, it had a second exit, a narrow passage that emerged about 50 yards from the house, hidden among the rocks. I'd forgotten about it, but my grandmother had shown it to me once, when I was very young. She'd said it was there in case we ever needed to escape, in case they ever came. This way, I said. I pulled back the rug in the corner of the kitchen, revealing the hatch. It was rusty and old, but it opened when I yanked on it. A ladder led down into darkness. Go, I told Emma. I'm right behind you. She climbed down, and I followed, pulling the hatch closed above us. The cellar was pitch black, but I had my phone. I turned on the flashlight and looked around. The space was small and cramped, filled with old jars and forgotten boxes. But there, at the far end, was a narrow opening in the wall, the escape passage. We crawled through. The passage was tight and low, barely wide enough for a person to fit through. I had to push the bags ahead of me, squeezing through gaps that seemed to get narrower with every inch. The air was stale and cold, and I could feel the weight of the earth pressing down on us. But we kept moving. Above us, muffled by layers of stone and dirt, I could hear them breaking into the house. I could hear them tearing through the rooms, searching for us, and I could hear the moment they found the hatch. Faster, I hissed at Emma. She was ahead of me, crawling as fast as she could. I could see the terror in her movements, the desperate urgency. Behind us, in the passage, I heard something else. Something following us. The scratching sound, that horrible, deliberate scratching. They're in the tunnel, Emma gasped. Keep going, don't stop. The passage seemed to go on forever. My arms were aching, my knees scraped raw. The scratching was getting closer, accompanied now by that horrible breathing, wet and ragged, like something that had forgotten how lungs were supposed to work. And then, finally I saw it, a faint gray light ahead, the exit. Emma reached it first, scrambling up and out. I was right behind her, pushing myself through the narrow opening and out into the night air. We were on the hillside, maybe 50 yards from the house. I could see it from here, lights blazing in every window, shadows moving behind the curtains. Run, I said. The road. We have to reach the road. We ran, down the hillside, through the trees, stumbling over rocks and roots in the darkness. I didn't look back. I couldn't look back. I just ran, holding Emma's hand, dragging her along when she stumbled. The road appeared ahead of us, a pale ribbon cutting through the forest, and beyond it, parked at the pullout where the dirt road met the main route, was another car. A truck, its headlights on, engine running. Standing beside it was Mrs. Bellamy. "Get in!" she shouted. "Quickly!" We didn't question it. We threw ourselves into the truck, and Mrs. Bellamy slammed the door behind us and got behind the wheel. The tires spun on the gravel as she gunned the engine, and then we were moving, roaring down the mountain road, leaving the house and the lights and the scratching far behind. I looked back just once. The figures were standing at the edge of the road, watching us go. Dozens of them, pale and tall and wrong. They didn't follow. They just stood there, watching. And as we rounded a corner and they disappeared from view, I heard a voice. Faint, distant, carried on the wind. "We'll be waiting, Nathan. We'll always be waiting." Mrs. Bellamy drove for over an hour without speaking. She took us out of the mountains, down through the winding roads, and onto the highway. Only when we were surrounded by the lights of civilization, when other cars were passing us and the darkness of the forest was far behind, did she finally slow down. "There's a motel about 10 miles ahead," she said. "You can stay there tonight. In the morning, go back to Richmond. Don't stop. Don't turn around. Don't ever come back." "Mrs. Bellamy," I managed, my voice hoarse. "How did you know? How did you know to come?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Your grandmother and I made a pact years ago. If anything ever happened, if the hollow folk ever came for one of us, the other would do whatever it took to help. I couldn't save her, but I could save you." "What happened to my grandmother?" I asked. "She died when I was 12. They said it was her heart." Mrs. Bellamy's hands tightened on the wheel. "It was her heart, but not the way they meant. She gave it to them, gave herself to them so they would leave the rest of the family alone. She thought it would end there. She was wrong." I felt sick. Why? Why did she do that? Because they had already taken her husband, your great-grandfather. She thought if she joined them, she could be with him again. A pause. "The hollow folk don't kill people, Nathan. They take them, bring them into the hollow places, change them, make them part of something else, something that doesn't end. Your grandmother is still out there, somewhere in those mountains, still walking, still watching, still waiting." I thought about the voice I'd heard outside the door, my grandmother's voice. "That was really her," I said. "At the house. That was really my grandmother. What's left of her? They keep the voices, the memories, the shapes. But the person inside, that's gone. Has been for a long time." We reached the motel and Mrs. Bellamy pulled into the parking lot. She turned to look at me, her ancient eyes filled with something like sadness. "I'm sorry, Nathan. I'm sorry you had to come back. I'm sorry you had to learn the truth. But you need to understand something. They've marked you now. They know who you are. And they won't stop. Not ever. Then what do I do? You run. You keep running. You stay away from the mountains, from the wild places, from anywhere the old things might still be sleeping, and you pray that they never find you again." She pressed something into my hand. "Keys to the motel room. I've already paid for the night. There's salt on all the windows and doors. You should be safe until morning. After that, you're on your own." She drove away without another word. Emma and I stood in the parking lot, watching her taillights disappear into the night. Then we went inside and locked the door behind us. It's been 2 years since that night. Emma and I are married now. We live in a city, as far from the mountains as we could get. We have an apartment on the 15th floor of a high-rise, surrounded by concrete and glass, and the constant noise of urban life. We chose it deliberately. Nothing natural, nothing wild, nothing that could remind us of what we left behind. I sold the house, didn't even go back for my mother's things, just signed the papers and let some stranger deal with whatever was left. I don't know who bought it. I don't want to know. For a while, things were good, normal. We fell into the rhythms of everyday life, and the memories of that night began to fade, not disappear. Never that, but fade. Become something that felt more like a bad dream than a lived experience. But lately, things have been different. It started a few months ago. I was walking home from work, taking my usual route through the downtown streets. It was evening, the sky just starting to darken, and I was lost in thought. Then I felt it, that familiar prickle on the back of my neck, the sense of being watched. I looked around, but there was nothing unusual, just people going about their business, cars passing by, the normal chaos of city life. Then I saw him. He was standing across the street, half hidden in the shadow of an alley. A man, or something shaped like a man, tall and thin, his features obscured by the darkness. He was looking right at me. I blinked, and he was gone. I told myself it was nothing, a trick of the light. My imagination running wild, but it happened again a week later, and again the week after that. Different places, different times, but always the same. A figure in the shadows, watching, waiting, and then, last night, something else. I woke up around 3 a.m, that same hour I'd woken up in my mother's house all those years ago. Emma was asleep beside me, her breathing soft and steady, and from somewhere below, from the street 15 stories down, I heard a voice. Nathan, my mother's voice, clear as day, despite the distance, despite the closed windows, despite every law of physics that should have made it impossible. Nathan, honey, come to the window. I want to show you something. I didn't go. I lay there, frozen, listening as the voice called my name over and over. Eventually, it stopped. This morning, I went down to the street. I don't know what I expected to find, but there, on the concrete sidewalk directly below our window, was a mark, gouged into the stone like something had scratched it with impossible strength, the same symbol that had been on my mother's door, the same pattern I still don't understand. They found me. I don't know how. I don't know why now, after all this time. But Mrs. Bellamy was right. They don't stop. They don't forget. And sooner or later, they come for what's theirs. I'm writing this because I need someone to know what happened. I need someone to understand, in case I'm not around to tell the story myself. If you're reading this, if you ever find yourself in the Appalachian Mountains, in those deep hollows and forgotten places, where the old things still sleep, be careful. Watch the shadows. Listen for footsteps. And if you hear someone you love calling your name from the darkness, don't answer. Just run. Run, and don't look back. Because they're patient. They're always patient. And they never stop waiting. Thank you for joining me tonight, Nightfall Archive. This concludes our Appalachian series, and I hope these stories have given you something to think about. Remember to take care of each other out there. Watch over your loved ones. And never, ever forget that some places in this world are best left alone. I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe.